After being rushed to the hospital with severe chest pain, I called my husband begging him to come. He texted back, "Can't leave right now. Having dinner with my female colleague Jessica. She's going through a rough divorce." What the restaurant manager discovered when he approached their table made my husband realize he'd lost the most important thing in his life. The text arrived while I was lying in the ER at Memorial Hospital, electrodes attached to my chest and an IV dripping into my arm. "Can't leave dinner with Jessica right now. She really needs support through her divorce. Call your sister if you need someone. Sorry, babe." I stared at my husband David's message through the haze of anxiety medication, my heart monitor beeping erratically beside me, and managed to type back with shaking fingers. Okay. That single word would end our 8-year marriage, though David didn't know it yet. He was too busy being Jessica's emotional support system to realize his wife was having a cardiac episode, choosing between panic and the possibility that my heart might actually be failing. The nurses had asked me 3 times if there was someone else they could call. Someone else. But I kept staring at that message, reading it over and over, like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something that resembled love. My husband of 8 years had just suggested I call my sister during a medical emergency because Jessica Martinez, his newly divorced colleague with the endless emotional crises, needed him more. This morning felt like it belonged to a different person's life now. I'd woken up at 6 a.m. with tightness in my chest that I'd attributed to stress from the presentation I was giving at the marketing conference today. David was already in the shower, humming something while he got ready for what he'd casually mentioned was just another client dinner. "Big meeting today?" I'd asked when he emerged, watching him select the burgundy tie that Jessica had complimented last week during their strategy session. "Jessica's really struggling with her divorce proceedings," he'd said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Her ex is being vindictive about the custody arrangements. She needs someone stable to talk through her options." Someone stable. David had appointed himself Jessica's personal therapist, available at all hours for her emotional emergencies. What had started as professional mentorship when she joined our consulting firm 6 months ago had evolved into something that consumed more of my husband's attention than our marriage did. I'd made coffee while David gathered his things, documents for clients that increasingly seemed to involve Jessica's projects. The kitchen felt smaller somehow when he was preparing for Jessica dinners, like there wasn't enough oxygen for both his concern for her and his awareness of me. "What time will you be home?" I'd asked, already knowing the answer would be vague. Hard to say. Jessica's really fragile right now. Her divorce should be final next month, but her ex is making everything complicated. He'd kissed my forehead absently, already mentally at that restaurant with Jessica, planning how to solve her latest crisis. Jessica Martinez had become David's crusade ever since her husband filed for divorce, and she'd started working closely with our team. She was everything I wasn't, petite, vulnerable, constantly in need of rescue. She had a way of looking at David like he was the only person who truly understood her pain, the only one strong enough to help her through her devastating life transition. Jessica brings out my protective instincts. David had explained last month when I'd asked why he was working so many late nights suddenly. She's been through hell with her marriage. She needs someone who can be objective about her situation. Objective. The word had stung because I knew David was anything but objective when it came to Jessica's problems. He was emotionally invested in ways that had nothing to do with professional mentorship and everything to do with being needed by someone who made him feel important. The chest pain had started around 10 a.m., a tightness that made it difficult to concentrate during my presentation at the downtown convention center. I'd attributed it to nerves. I was speaking to 200 marketing professionals about digital transformation strategies, but by lunch break, I was sweating and dizzy. "You look pale," Linda, my conference coordinator, had said when I stumbled during the Q&A session. "Maybe you should sit down for a few minutes." I'd tried to push through the afternoon sessions, but the pain had intensified, radiating down my left arm in a way that made my medical training from nursing school scream warnings. By 4 p.m., I was in the convention center's first aid station, trying to convince myself it was just anxiety while the EMT took my blood pressure. "Ma'am, your heart rate is elevated, and you're showing classic signs of cardiac distress," the EMT had said, his expression professionally concerned. "We need to get you to a hospital immediately." I'd called David from the ambulance, expecting him to drop everything and meet me at Memorial Hospital like any normal spouse would. Instead, I got voicemail. Then another voicemail. Then that text message that reduced our marriage to a burden he couldn't be bothered to shoulder because Jessica's emotional needs took priority. Now, lying in the cardiac unit with monitors tracking every heartbeat, I thought about all the signs I'd been ignoring for months. The way David's face lit up when Jessica texted during dinner. The sudden interest in working late when Jessica needed guidance on her projects. The expensive dinners charged to the company card that were always justified as client support. Dr. Chen appeared beside my bed, her expression professionally calm but thorough. She was young, probably early 30s, with the kind of focused competence that made patients feel safe even during scary moments. "Mrs. Wilson, your EKG shows some irregularities and your stress levels are significantly elevated. We're running additional tests to rule out any cardiac events, but I want to keep you for observation tonight." "Is it serious?" I managed to ask through the medication fog. "We're being cautious. Sometimes what presents as cardiac symptoms can be severe anxiety or panic attacks, especially in women under significant stress." She glanced at the empty chair beside my bed. "Is your husband coming?" I showed her David's text message. Dr. Chen read it twice, her expression shifting from medical neutrality to something that looked distinctly like anger. "A dinner meeting," she repeated flatly, "during your cardiac emergency." "Jessica's divorce is really complicated," I said, the words feeling hollow even as I spoke them. David's been helping her navigate the legal issues. Dr. Chen had been practicing emergency medicine for 12 years. She'd seen every variation of family crisis response. But something about my situation seemed to genuinely disturb her professional composure. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm going to have security check on your husband. Make sure he understands that you're in the cardiac unit for monitoring, not dealing with minor discomfort at home." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. Heart episodes require family support, especially for someone your age. This isn't something you should be handling alone while your husband has dinner with a colleague." Officer Janet Torres from hospital security took down the restaurant information with the expression of someone who dealt with absent family members before. Benedetto's was downtown, the kind of upscale Italian place David had started frequenting since Jessica mentioned it was her favorite. "I'll make sure he gets the message personally," she said grimly. Some people need to see a uniform to understand that cardiac monitoring isn't optional family time. They moved me to a private room while I was still thinking about David sitting across from Jessica at Benedetto's, probably listening to her tearful updates about her ex-husband, while his wife lay connected to heart monitors. The last thing I remember before the anxiety medication kicked in was wondering if David would even check his phone, or if Jessica's problems would be absorbing enough to make him forget I existed. I woke up 2 hours later feeling groggy but stable. The nurse, Patricia, was checking my vitals with the gentle efficiency of someone who genuinely cared about her patient's recovery. "Your heart rhythm has stabilized," she said, adjusting my IV with practiced hands. "Dr. Chen wants to keep you overnight for observation, but your latest tests look much better." "Thank you." My throat felt dry from the oxygen they'd given me. Patricia hesitated, then pulled up a chair beside my bed. "Honey, I need to tell you something about your husband." The way she said it made my chest tighten again, though the monitors showed my heart rate was stable. "What happened?" "Security went to the restaurant like Dr. Chen requested. Found your husband at Benedetto's with a woman matching the description you gave." Patricia's voice carried the careful tone medical professionals use when delivering unwelcome news. They were at a corner table, very intimate setting. Candles, wine, holding hands across the table. Holding hands. While I was in the cardiac unit, David was holding hands with Jessica at a romantic restaurant, probably listening to her describe how misunderstood she felt by her ex-husband. The officer explained about your cardiac monitoring that you were in the hospital for potential heart problems. Patricia continued, her voice getting gentler. Your husband seemed shocked, like he'd completely forgotten you existed. The woman started crying, saying she felt terrible for keeping him from you. What did David say? According to Officer Torres, he kept asking if you were really okay, if it was actually serious, or if you were just having another anxiety episode. Patricia's expression showed what she thought of that response. When she confirmed you were in cardiac monitoring, he said he'd be here as soon as they finished dinner. As soon as they finished dinner. My potential heart attack could wait until David and Jessica completed their romantic evening at Benedetto's, probably including dessert and coffee and more tearful discussions about her emotional journey. My phone buzzed on the bedside table. David's name appeared with a message that would have been laughable if it wasn't so perfectly revealing. Just heard from hospital security. Are you really okay? Jessica thinks I should come check on you, but we haven't finished discussing her custody strategy. We'll be there soon. Don't worry. Don't worry. While I was connected to cardiac monitors and facing the possibility of heart problems at 32, David was telling me not to worry because he'd eventually get around to visiting once he'd finished solving Jessica's problems. Patricia read the message over my shoulder, her expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and professional concern. Amanda, honey, I've been doing this for 18 years. I've seen every kind of family response to medical emergencies. Spouses who drive through snowstorms to be here, parents who sleep in chairs for days, friends who organize prayer circles. She gestured at my phone. But this isn't normal behavior when someone you love is in the hospital. Jessica's really vulnerable right now, I said weakly, like that somehow justified David prioritizing her emotional crisis over my cardiac emergency. Jessica's not his wife, you are. Patricia's voice carried the firmness of someone who'd raised 4 children and didn't tolerate nonsense from anyone. You're in the cardiac unit, and he's finishing dinner with another woman. That's not professional mentorship. That's emotional affair territory. I closed my eyes, finally letting myself feel the full weight of what had happened. David had chosen Jessica over me during what could have been a life-threatening emergency. Not accidentally, not because he didn't understand the severity. He'd actively decided that finishing dinner with Jessica was more important than being with his wife in the hospital. Patricia, I said quietly, could you call my sister? Her name is Rachel Martinez. I think I need someone here who actually cares about my well-being. Rachel arrived at 9 p.m., still wearing her scrubs from her shift at Children's Hospital, her face tight with a fury I'd rarely seen. She was 5 years younger than me, but had always been the protective one, and right now she looked ready to commit violence against my husband. 4 hours, she said, settling into the chair beside my bed. 4 hours you've been here, and he's still having dinner with his work wife. Jessica's not his work wife. Amanda, stop. Rachel's voice cut through my automatic defense of David. Stop making excuses for him. You're in the cardiac unit. The cardiac unit. There's no dinner meeting important enough to miss that. She pulled out her phone, showing me a screenshot from David's Instagram story, posted 1 hour ago. David and Jessica at Benedetto's, sharing tiramisu and looking deeply into each other's eyes. The caption read, sometimes the best therapy is just listening, being there, support. He posted this while you were in the hospital, Rachel said flatly. Posted about being there for someone while his wife was alone in cardiac monitoring. The photo was professionally composed, clearly taken by their server. David's hand was covering Jessica's on the table, her eyes glistening with tears that somehow made her look beautiful rather than broken. He was leaning forward with the expression of complete attention that I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Look at him, Rachel continued. He's not thinking about you at all. This is who he is when he thinks you're safely out of the way, when he thinks you'll just handle your own medical emergency like you handle everything else. That night, I lay awake listening to the hospital sounds around me. The gentle beeping of monitors, the soft conversations between nurses, the distant sounds of families gathered around beds. Normal sounds of people caring for each other during crisis, sounds that highlighted how abnormal my situation was. My phone showed several missed calls from David, finally made after his dinner with Jessica ended around 11 p.m. The voicemails were increasingly frantic as he apparently realized that cardiac monitoring was more serious than he'd initially assumed. Amanda, I'm so sorry. I just saw the missed calls. Jessica and I lost track of time discussing her custody arrangements. I'm coming to the hospital right now. But he didn't come. Visiting hours were over, and according to Patricia, who checked with security, no one had even attempted to contact the hospital about emergency visitation. The second voicemail came at midnight. I tried to come, but they won't let me in after visiting hours. I'll be there first thing in the morning. Jessica feels terrible about keeping me from you. She had no idea it was this serious. Jessica feels terrible. Even in his guilt-ridden middle-of-the-night voicemail, David was more concerned with Jessica's emotional state than his wife's medical condition. The third message arrived at 2 a.m. I keep thinking about you alone in the hospital. This whole situation is so stressful. Jessica thinks cardiac episodes are often just anxiety in women our age, so you're probably fine. Love you. Jessica thinks. My husband was taking medical advice about my heart condition from the woman he'd chosen over me during my emergency, the woman whose emotional needs had become more important than my physical health. The next morning brought Dr. Chen for my discharge evaluation and a conversation that would change everything about how I viewed my marriage. Your heart is fine, she said, reviewing my overnight monitoring results. The episode was likely severe anxiety manifesting as cardiac symptoms, which is more common than people realize. You can go home today, but I want you to follow up with your primary care physician about stress management. My sister will drive me. Dr. Chen sat down, her expression shifting from medical professional to something more personal. Amanda, I've been thinking about your situation all night. What happened yesterday wasn't just concerning medically. It was concerning from a relationship perspective. David was helping a colleague. David was prioritizing another woman over his wife during a medical emergency. Dr. Chen's tone was gentle but firm. I've seen hundreds of couples navigate health scares. The strong relationships pull together immediately. The troubled ones, well, they show you exactly where people's priorities really lie. She handed me a business card. This is my friend, Dr. Sarah Kim. She's a therapist who specializes in helping people process sudden relationship clarity. I'm not saying you need counseling immediately, but I want you to have resources when you're ready to think through what happened. Dr. Sarah Kim. The name felt significant somehow, like a door opening to possibilities I hadn't considered while I was busy accommodating David's relationship with Jessica. Rachel helped me into her car, moving with the protective efficiency of someone who'd spent years taking care of people. Where to? Home? I thought about going back to the house David and I shared, with its carefully coordinated furniture and framed photos of us from happier times. About waiting for him to come home from another Jessica meeting with explanations and apologies that wouldn't change what had been revealed yesterday. Actually, I said, let's go to your place. I need some time to think without David there trying to manage my reaction. Rachel lived in a sunny apartment across town, decorated with plants and books, and evidence of a life lived for herself rather than in accommodation to someone else's emotional needs. She settled me on her couch with tea and the kind of focused attention I'd forgotten was possible. He called me 3 times last night, she said, handing me a mug with a handle shaped like a cat. Frantic. Asking if I thought you were really okay, if cardiac monitoring was actually serious, if I thought you were being dramatic. What did you tell him? That his wife had been in the cardiac unit for 6 hours while he was holding hands with another woman at a romantic restaurant. Rachel sat down across from me, her expression serious. And that if he didn't understand why that was a problem, he probably shouldn't be married. Jessica's not just another woman. Amanda. Rachel's voice was gentle but firm. Jessica is absolutely another woman, and David is emotionally involved with her in ways that have nothing to do with professional mentorship. Everything about yesterday proves it. The words hit like cold water, Even though part of me had known for months, the late nights, the constant texting, the way David's whole demeanor changed when Jessica needed something, like her problems were more interesting and important than anything in his actual life. "He chose her over me when I was in the hospital," I said quietly. "When I could have been having a heart attack, he chose finishing dinner with her." Exactly. And that tells you everything you need to know about where his heart is, about what your marriage actually means to him. That afternoon, while I napped on Rachel's couch, my phone buzzed constantly with messages from David. Rachel screened them first, reading each one with increasing irritation. The messages started confused. "Where are you? The hospital said you were discharged, but you're not home. I brought flowers and your favorite soup." Then concerned. "I'm really worried. Please just let me know you're okay. I know I messed up yesterday, but we can work through this." Then defensive. "I'm sorry about the dinner. Jessica was really struggling and needed support, but I should have left when the hospital called. I didn't realize how serious your condition was." Then revealing, Jessica feels terrible about what happened. She thinks you might be angry at her, which isn't fair since she didn't know you were having cardiac symptoms. Maybe we should all sit down and talk this through. And finally, the message that showed where David's loyalties really lay. Jessica's ex is threatening to change their custody arrangement because of the stress this situation has caused her. She's devastated. "I think you're overreacting to what was essentially a miscommunication." Rachel read the final message aloud, her voice tight with controlled anger. "He's not apologizing. He's making you the problem for being upset that he chose another woman over your medical emergency, and he's worried about how your cardiac episode is affecting Jessica's divorce proceedings." "David probably doesn't realize how it looks," I said weakly, though I was starting to doubt that David was as oblivious as I'd been telling myself. "Amanda, David absolutely knows what he's doing. He's creating a relationship with Jessica that gives him everything he's missing in your marriage. Drama, excitement, the feeling of being needed and important." Rachel set my phone down carefully, "And he's using her vulnerability to justify treating you like you're less important than she is." That evening, Rachel helped me draft a response to David's messages. It needed to be clear, firm, and leave no room for misinterpretation or negotiation. "Keep it simple," Rachel advised. "Don't explain, don't justify, don't give him ammunition to argue with. Just state your boundaries." We worked on it together. "I'll be staying with Rachel while I recover. Please don't contact me directly. Have Jessica help you figure out what happens next, since her emotional needs are apparently more important than your wife's medical emergencies." We sent it before I could lose my nerve, then turned off my phone and watched cooking shows until I fell asleep on the couch, my sister keeping watch like she had when we were kids and I was sick. 3 days later, Dr. Sarah Kim called me personally. Dr. Chen had mentioned my situation, and she was offering a consultation because she specialized in helping people process sudden relationship revelations during crisis situations. "Medical emergencies have a way of stripping away pretense," Dr. Kim said over the phone, her voice carrying professional warmth. "They show us exactly where we stand in other people's priorities. It sounds like your husband's response revealed some painful truths about your marriage." He was helping a colleague through a difficult divorce. He was choosing to prioritize another woman's emotional needs over his wife's medical emergency. Dr. Kim interrupted gently. "That's not professional mentorship. That's emotional infidelity, and it became impossible to ignore when you needed him most." The consultation was scheduled for Friday afternoon. Rachel drove me to Dr. Kim's office, a comfortable space designed to feel safe rather than clinical. Dr. Kim was exactly what I'd hoped for. Mid-40s, kind eyes, the demeanor of someone who'd helped hundreds of people navigate the worst revelations of their lives. "Tell me about Tuesday," she said, settling behind her desk with a notepad. I told her everything. The chest pain, the ambulance ride, the hours in cardiac monitoring while David finished dinner with Jessica. The Instagram photos, the voicemails that came hours too late, the messages that somehow made Jessica's feelings more important than mine. Dr. Kim took notes throughout, occasionally nodding or making sounds of professional recognition. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with the expression of someone delivering a diagnosis. Amanda, I've worked with hundreds of people dealing with infidelity, emotional affairs, and relationship betrayals. What your husband did, choosing another woman over your medical emergency, is one of the clearest demonstrations of misplaced priorities I've ever encountered. She turned her computer screen toward me, showing the Instagram photo Rachel had screenshotted. He posted this while you were in the hospital, called it being there for someone while his wife was alone in cardiac monitoring. That's not a man confused about his priorities. That's a man who's made his choice. Maybe he was just scared about my condition. Amanda, fear doesn't make people post romantic dinner photos. Fear makes people drop everything to be with the person they love. Dr. Kim's voice was compassionate but clear. David wasn't scared. He was annoyed at the interruption to his evening with Jessica. She pulled out a folder of resources. The question now is what you want to do with this information. Some marriages can recover from emotional affairs, but it requires the unfaithful partner to end the outside relationship completely and commit to rebuilding trust. Based on David's messages, he seems more concerned with protecting Jessica than repairing your marriage. What if I'm overreacting? What if this is all just professional? Professional colleagues don't hold hands at romantic restaurants. They don't post intimate dinner photos on social media. They don't prioritize each other over spouses during medical emergencies. Dr. Kim leaned forward slightly. Amanda, you're not overreacting. You're finally reacting appropriately to behavior that should have been unacceptable from the beginning. That weekend, while I stayed at Rachel's apartment, David finally attempted a face-to-face conversation. He showed up Saturday morning looking haggard, his usually perfect appearance disheveled in a way that suggested he'd been sleeping poorly. Amanda, we need to talk, he said when Rachel answered the door. This has gone too far. Rachel looked back at me for permission, her expression protective but controlled. I nodded, curious to hear what explanation David had constructed for choosing Jessica over my cardiac emergency. He sat stiffly on Rachel's couch, looking around her apartment like he'd never seen it before, though we'd been here dozens of times over the years. His discomfort was obvious, and I realized this was the first time he'd had to face consequences for his behavior. I'm sorry about Tuesday, he began, the words sounding rehearsed. I should have left dinner immediately when the hospital contacted me, but Jessica was having a complete breakdown about her custody hearing, and I couldn't just abandon her in that state. Couldn't abandon her. But abandoning me in the cardiac unit had been acceptable. David, I said carefully, you told me to call my sister during a medical emergency so you could finish dinner with Jessica. Then you posted romantic photos while I was alone in the hospital. That's not professional support. That's you choosing her over me. That's not fair. Jessica's divorce is incredibly complex, and she doesn't have anyone else she can trust with the details. I'm just trying to be a good colleague and human being. What about being a good husband? David's composure cracked slightly. You're being dramatic about this. The doctors said it was just anxiety, not an actual heart attack. Jessica and I were discussing important legal strategies that couldn't wait. David, Rachel interjected, her voice dangerously quiet. Your wife was in cardiac monitoring. That's not dramatic. That's potentially life-threatening. Jessica thinks Amanda might be having psychosomatic responses to stress about our marriage, David said, looking directly at me. She suggested that maybe you're unconsciously creating medical emergencies to get attention because you're feeling insecure about my success at work. Jessica thinks. Even now, even during what was supposed to be an apology, David was quoting Jessica's psychological analysis of me, his wife. The woman he'd chosen over my medical emergency was now diagnosing my mental health from afar. David, I said quietly, you just quoted another woman's opinion about my medical condition instead of showing concern for my well-being. Do you understand what that tells me about our marriage? Jessica has insights into relationship dynamics from her own divorce experience. Get out. Rachel stood up, her voice cold with fury. Get out of my apartment right now. David looked shocked, like he couldn't understand why anyone would be angry about him seeking relationship advice from the woman he'd prioritized over his wife's cardiac emergency. Amanda, you can't seriously be considering ending our marriage over one dinner. I'm not ending our marriage over one dinner, I said, standing up despite the dizziness that still came with sudden movements. I'm ending it because you showed me exactly where I rank in your priorities. Jessica's emotional needs matter more to you than my physical health. Her opinions about my medical condition matter more than my actual experience. Her feelings about our marital problems matter more than our actual marriage. David left without another word, but not before I heard him making a phone call in Rachel's driveway. Jessica? Yeah, it's exactly what you predicted. She's being completely unreasonable about Tuesday. Even in defeat, his first call was to Jessica. The divorce papers were filed the following Monday. David contested everything, apparently on Jessica's advice that I was being vindictive and irrational. It didn't matter. The evidence was clear, documented in hospital records and Instagram posts and text messages that showed his priorities with perfect clarity. My lawyer, Janet Morrison, no relation to Jessica Martinez, thankfully, handled everything with professional efficiency. 8 years of marriage, and he's fighting you over the house settlement because another woman told him to, she said, shaking her head. I've seen a lot of emotional affairs, but rarely one where the husband is this obvious about his replacement wife. Replacement wife? That's what Jessica is, Amanda. She's not just his colleague or friend. She's who he wants to be married to. He's just too cowardly to admit it directly, so he's making you the villain for noticing. 3 months later, I was signing the final divorce papers when Janet mentioned the development that made everything perfectly clear. Interesting update, she said casually. David and Jessica got engaged last week. Posted photos from their weekend getaway to Napa Valley. That was fast. Not really. They were functionally married the whole time you were fighting for your actual marriage. The engagement is just making it official. Janet's expression was grimly satisfied. Though I should mention that Jessica's ex-husband is using David's social media posts from during your marriage as evidence that she was committing adultery. Apparently, those romantic dinner photos you mentioned are helping him win his custody case. Cosmic justice. David's Instagram documentation of his emotional affair was now being used against Jessica in her divorce proceedings. The woman he'd chosen over me was losing her children partly because of evidence of their relationship. I almost feel sorry for her, I said, surprising myself. Don't, Janet replied firmly. Jessica knew David was married when she started requiring his constant emotional support. She made conscious choices, just like he did. Now they both get to live with the consequences. The house sold within 2 weeks. I used my portion of the proceeds to buy a small condo near Rachel's apartment, within walking distance of the marketing firm where I'd taken a new position. The condo was modern and bright, with space for the life I was building independently. 6 months after the cardiac episode, I was cooking dinner in my new kitchen when my phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen for the first time since the divorce was finalized. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Amanda? His voice sounded strained, older somehow. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. What do you need, David? I wanted to apologize. Really apologize, not like before when I was trying to justify everything. There was a long pause filled with the sound of traffic and what might have been wind. Jessica and I broke up. The engagement's off. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? He sounded surprised, like he'd expected me to be gleeful about his relationship failure. I don't wish you unhappiness, David. I just wish you'd been capable of prioritizing your wife when it mattered. Another pause, longer this time. I realize now that I made terrible choices. Jessica, she was exciting because she needed me in ways you never did. You were strong and independent, and I guess I felt more important when someone was constantly in crisis. So you created a crisis in our marriage to feel needed. I didn't think of it that way at the time, but yeah, probably. His voice was thick with something that might have been genuine regret. Amanda, I keep thinking about that night in the hospital. How scared you must have been. How alone you felt. I should have been there. Yes, you should have. Is there any chance we could try again? Maybe go to counseling, work through what went wrong? No, I said gently but firmly. There's not. Because of Jessica? Because I chose her over you that night? Because of who you became when you chose her. Because when I needed you most, you weren't there. Because you told me to call my sister during a medical emergency so you could comfort another woman. I paused, watching the sunset through my kitchen window. Because you showed me that my health crisis was less important to you than her emotional drama. I was confused about what I wanted then, but I know now that what we had was more valuable than anything Jessica offered. You know that now because Jessica left you when you stopped being useful to her custody case. If her divorce had gone differently, would you have come to the same realization? The silence that followed was answer enough. I didn't think so, I said softly. David, I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope you learn to value the right things and to show up for people when they need you. But that journey doesn't include me. After I hung up, I finished cooking dinner, pasta primavera for one, with fresh herbs from the garden I'd started on my balcony. Simple food that I made because I enjoyed it, not because someone else expected it. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Dinner tomorrow? Mark's making his famous barbacoa, and I invite that guy from your yoga class, the one who actually shows up when he says he will. Mark was Rachel's boyfriend, a teacher who laughed easily and treated my sister like she was the most interesting person in any room. The guy from yoga class was Daniel, who'd asked me to coffee twice and both times had arrived early, stayed as long as I wanted, and never once checked his phone for messages from other women who might need him more. Sounds perfect, I texted back. Should I bring anything? Just yourself. Maybe that lemon cake you've been perfecting. I smiled, realizing I was looking forward to Sunday dinner with people who chose to spend time together, who showed up when they promised to, who didn't require constant crisis management to feel valued in return. The condo was quiet as evening settled around it, but it was a peaceful quiet. The silence of a life lived on my own terms rather than in accommodation to someone else's emotional needs. I'd lost a marriage, but I'd found myself in the process. Tomorrow, I'd go back to work, to building marketing campaigns and managing client relationships that were based on mutual respect rather than manufactured drama. I'd tend my small garden and cook meals I actually wanted to eat, and continue creating the space I'd built from the wreckage of what I'd thought I wanted. It wasn't the life I'd planned when I married David 8 years ago, but it was infinitely better than the life I'd been accepting. Sometimes cardiac episodes forced more than medical revelations. Sometimes they revealed exactly what your life was worth to the people who claimed to love you most. The lemon cake would be perfect for Sunday dinner. I was learning to make things that brought joy to people who deserved it, starting with myself and extending outward to a community of people who understood that love was a choice you made consistently, especially during the difficult moments. Outside, the evening was settling into the comfortable rhythm of a neighborhood where people knew each other's names and checked on each other during emergencies. Mrs. Patterson across the hall was practicing piano, something gentle and melodic. The couple downstairs were grilling on their balcony, their quiet conversation mixing with the scent of herbs and charcoal. Normal life. The kind David had called boring compared to Jessica's dramatic emotional needs, but which I now recognized as the foundation of genuine happiness. People choosing each other consistently, building trust through daily actions, prioritizing relationships over excitement. My condo was small but perfectly sized for the life I was building. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen where I could experiment with recipes, a living room where friends could gather without walking on eggshells around someone else's emotional volatility, a balcony where I could grow things that required consistent care to flourish. As I measured ingredients for tomorrow's lemon cake, I realized I was humming again. Something my mother used to sing while cooking, a song about finding your way home to yourself. It had taken a cardiac episode and the end of my marriage to find that place. But I was finally here. The timer on my phone showed 30 minutes until the cake needed to go in the oven. Enough time to water my balcony garden, to check my lesson plans for the new marketing workshop I was teaching at the community college, to think about the life I was building one small choice at a time. Through my kitchen window, I could see couples walking their dogs in the courtyard below, normal people living normal lives, choosing each other in small moments that built trust over time. No manufactured crises or emotional rescue scenarios, just the steady foundation of people who showed up when they promised to. My phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. Looking forward to tomorrow. Should I bring anything special for the barbacoa dinner? I typed back quickly, just yourself. Rachel's boyfriend is an amazing cook, and I'm making lemon cake. Perfect. See you at 6. I set the phone aside and continued measuring flour, thinking about how different this felt from the anxious waiting I'd done during my marriage with David. No wondering when he'd come home from Jessica meetings. No preparing explanations for why I hadn't accomplished enough during his absence. No checking my phone to see if her latest crisis would extend his time away from our relationship. Just anticipation for Sunday dinner with people who chose to spend time together because they enjoyed each other's company. Not because anyone needed to be rescued or fixed or constantly validated. The community college workshop had been Rachel's idea. You're brilliant at marketing strategy, she'd said 3 months after my divorce was finalized. Why not teach other people what you know? Build something that's entirely yours. The workshop met twice a week, teaching small business owners how to develop authentic marketing strategies. My students were hairdressers and bakery owners and freelance consultants who needed practical help growing their businesses. They appreciated direct advice and honest feedback, and they showed up because they wanted to learn, not because they needed emotional support. Professor Wilson, my student Maria, had said after last week's class, "You've helped me double my catering bookings in 2 months. I finally understand how to talk about my business in ways that attract the right customers." Professor Wilson. I'd kept David's last name through the divorce proceedings because changing it seemed like too much paperwork. But hearing it in a professional context that had nothing to do with him felt like reclaiming something that had always been mine. The cake batter was smooth and perfectly yellow, lemony scented, and ready for the oven. I poured it into the pan I'd bought specifically for my new kitchen, one that had never been used to make desserts for David's work functions or Jessica's emotional support dinners. While it baked, I sat on my small balcony with a cup of tea, watching the sun set behind the downtown skyline. The cardiac episode had been 6 months ago, but the peace I felt now seemed like it had taken years to achieve. Maybe it had. Maybe I'd been building toward this moment for longer than I'd realized, collecting small disappointments and accommodations until the weight of them had literally affected my heart. Dr. Chen had been right about stress manifesting as physical symptoms. My body had been trying to tell me something I hadn't been ready to hear consciously, that living in constant accommodation to someone else's emotional needs was literally bad for my health. The therapy sessions with Dr. Kahan, Kim had helped me understand the pattern I'd fallen into with David. "You became his emotional manager," she'd explained during one of our early sessions. "You took responsibility for his happiness, his comfort, his sense of purpose, while he took responsibility for Jessica's emotional well-being. You were both caretaking, but not for each other." Why did I allow that? Because you thought that's what love looked like. Taking care of someone, anticipating their needs, making their life easier. Dr. Kim had leaned forward slightly. But real love requires mutuality. Both people taking care of each other, both people showing up when it matters. The timer chimed, pulling me back to the present. The lemon cake was perfect, golden brown and springy to the touch, filling my small kitchen with the scent of citrus and vanilla. I set it on the cooling rack and thought about tomorrow's dinner, about the easy conversation and genuine laughter that would happen around Rachel's table. Daniel had asked me out twice since we'd met at yoga class 3 months ago. Both times had been simple invitations, coffee at the bookstore cafe, a walk through the botanical gardens. Both times he'd arrived when he said he would, stayed as long as I wanted, and never once mentioned other women who might need his attention more. "You seem like someone who's learned to value her own time," he'd said during our second coffee date, when I'd mentioned that I was enjoying living alone. "I am," I'd replied, surprised by how true it felt. "Good, People who value their own time usually value other people's time too. It was such a simple observation, but it had stayed with me for weeks. David had never valued my time, or his own really. He'd given it away freely to Jessica's crises, to work emergencies that weren't really emergencies, to anyone who could make him feel important through their need for his attention. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Rachel's name appeared on the screen. "How's the cake coming?" she asked without preamble. "Perfect. Just out of the oven and cooling." "Excellent. Mark's been marinating the meat since this morning, and I made that cucumber salad you like." Rachel paused. "Amanda, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "I'm really proud of how you've handled this whole situation. The divorce, starting over, building a new life. You could have spent months trying to win David back, trying to compete with Jessica for his attention. Instead, you chose yourself." Chose yourself. The phrase settled into my chest like a warm stone, heavy with truth and possibility. "I didn't feel like I had much choice," I said. "After the cardiac episode, after seeing how little my medical emergency mattered to him, I couldn't go back to pretending that was acceptable. That's exactly what I mean. You couldn't pretend anymore, so you faced reality instead of making excuses for it. That takes courage." After we hung up, I sat on my balcony until full darkness fell, thinking about courage and choice and the difference between them. Courage was what I'd needed to leave David, to file for divorce, to start over at 32. Choice was what I exercised every day now, choosing to water my plants, to prepare lessons that help my students, to make dinner for one without feeling lonely, to look forward to Sunday gatherings with people who showed up consistently. The next morning brought a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my chest tightened with familiar anxiety before I reminded myself that I was safe now, that no one could demand my accommodation anymore. "Amanda, this is Jessica Martinez. I got your number from David. I know this is strange, but I wanted to talk to you about what happened. Could we meet for coffee?" I stared at the message for a full minute, processing the audacity of it. The woman who had been the other woman in my marriage, whose emotional needs had been prioritized over my cardiac emergency, wanted to meet for coffee, probably to explain herself, to seek absolution, to make sure I understood that she hadn't meant for things to go so far. I typed back quickly. "No, thank you. I have nothing to discuss with you." Her response came immediately. "I understand you're angry, but there are things you don't understand about the situation. David and I are over, and I feel terrible about how everything happened." Feel terrible. The same phrase David had used when he'd called 6 months after our divorce, when Jessica had left him and he'd suddenly realized what he'd thrown away. Neither of them had felt terrible while they were building their emotional affair. They'd only felt terrible when facing consequences. I deleted the conversation without responding and blocked her number. Whatever guilt or explanation Jessica was carrying, it wasn't my responsibility to absolve her of it. I'd spent enough years managing other people's emotional needs. Sunday dinner was exactly what I'd hoped for. Rachel's apartment filled with the scent of Mark's barbacoa and the sound of easy conversation. Daniel arrived with flowers. Not roses or anything romantically presumptuous, just a small bouquet of daisies, because he'd remembered me mentioning that they were my favorite. "These are beautiful," I said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness. "I figured if we're going to be friends, I should pay attention to what you actually like," he replied with a smile that was warm but not demanding. Friends. The word carried possibility without pressure, space for something to develop naturally rather than through manufactured crisis or emotional rescue scenarios. Mark had set up the dining table with mismatched chairs and cloth napkins, the kind of casual elegance that made everyone feel welcome. The barbacoa was perfect. Tender and flavorful, accompanied by Rachel's cucumber salad and homemade tortillas that Mark had learned to make from his grandmother. "So Amanda's teaching marketing now," Rachel said, serving herself a second helping. "Tell them about your students." I described the workshop, the small business owners who came eager to learn practical strategies for growth. "They're so different from corporate clients," I said. "They want real help, not just impressive presentations. If the strategies don't work, their businesses suffer directly." That must be rewarding, Daniel said. Working with people who implement your advice immediately instead of letting it disappear into committee meetings. It is. I feel like I'm actually helping people build something meaningful, rather than just managing other people's professional egos. The conversation flowed easily between Rachel's work at the Children's Hospital, Mark's latest woodworking projects, and Daniel's job as a librarian who specialized in community programming. No one checked their phones for messages from people who might need them more. No one manufactured urgency around problems that could wait until tomorrow. "This lemon cake is incredible," Mark said, cutting himself a second slice. "The recipe?" "My grandmother's, with a few modifications I've been experimenting with," I replied. "I'll write it down for you." "Amanda's been perfecting it for months," Rachel added, part of her new hobby of cooking exactly what she wants to eat. "Revolutionary concept," Daniel said with mock seriousness. "Cooking food you actually enjoy instead of what someone else expects." The comment was light, but it caught something real. For 8 years with David, I'd cooked meals designed to accommodate his preferences, his schedule, his need to impress colleagues or support Jessica through her various crises. Now I cooked because I enjoyed it, experimenting with flavors and techniques that pleased me. "It's amazing how much energy you have for things you actually want to do," I said, "when you're not constantly managing someone else's emotional needs." "Amen to that," Mark said, raising his beer bottle in a toast to emotional independence and lemon cake. We all clinked glasses, and I felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for years. This was what normal relationships looked like. People choosing to spend time together because they enjoyed each other's company, supporting each other without creating dependence, building trust through consistency rather than crisis. After dinner, Daniel helped me carry my cake plate and serving utensils down to my car. The evening air was cool and clear, perfect for the 10-minute drive back to my condo. "Thank you for inviting me," he said as I unlocked my car. "Your sister and Mark are wonderful, and the dinner was perfect." "Thank you for coming, and for the flowers. They're going to look beautiful on my kitchen table." "I hope we can do this again soon. Maybe next time I could cook for you. I make a decent risotto, and I promise to actually show up when I say I will." The promise was delivered lightly, but I heard the understanding underneath it. Daniel knew enough of my story to realize that reliability was important to me, that following through on commitments mattered more than grand gestures or romantic intensity. "I'd like that," I said, meaning it completely. Driving home through my quiet neighborhood, I thought about the year ahead. The marketing workshop was expanding to include online modules. My condo lease was up for renewal, and I was considering buying something permanent, maybe with a small yard for a real garden. Rachel and Mark were talking about getting married, and I was looking forward to helping plan a wedding based on what they actually wanted, rather than what would impress other people. Small plans, practical goals, the building blocks of a life chosen deliberately, rather than accepted by default. No manufactured drama, no emotional emergencies that required constant management, no accommodations to other people's inability to handle their own problems. At home, I arranged Daniel's daisies in a simple vase and placed them on my kitchen table, where they'd be the first thing I saw each morning. Tomorrow, I'd grade papers from my marketing students and prepare for Tuesday's class on social media strategy. I'd water my balcony garden and maybe try a new recipe for the curry I'd been wanting to perfect. Ordinary plans for an extraordinary gift. A life lived entirely on my own terms, chosen consciously rather than settled for unconsciously. The cardiac episode that had terrified me 8 months ago had become the moment everything changed. The crisis that revealed exactly where I stood in David's priorities and forced me to examine where I stood in my own. My phone buzzed with a goodnight text from Daniel. "Thank you again for tonight. Sweet dreams." Simple, kind, with no hidden agenda or emotional manipulation. I texted back, "Sleep well. Looking forward to that risotto." I turned off the lights and headed to my bedroom, past the framed photos of my family and friends, past the bookshelf full of novels I was reading for pleasure, rather than to appear intellectual, past the small workspace where I prepared lessons that actually helped people achieve their goals. This was what happiness looked like, I realized. Not constant excitement or dramatic rescue scenarios, but the quiet satisfaction of a life built consciously. Relationships chosen for their health rather than their intensity. Work that aligned with values rather than ego. The cardiac episode had been the end of my marriage, but it had also been the beginning of everything else. My independence, my self-respect, my understanding that love should add to your life rather than subtract from it. Sometimes the worst moments open doors to the best possibilities, if you were brave enough to walk through them. In my bedroom, I looked out at the city lights scattered across the horizon and thought about all the people who were probably facing their own moments of truth tonight. Partners choosing between obligations and opportunities, spouses deciding whether to answer phones during emergencies, individuals weighing their own needs against other people's demands. I hoped they would choose themselves, the way I'd finally learned to choose myself. I hoped they would recognize that real love doesn't require constant sacrifice, that healthy relationships enhance rather than diminish the people in them, that being needed and being valued are completely different things. The lemon cake had been perfect. Sunday dinner had been perfect. And for the first time in years, so was I. Not because my life was without challenges, but because I was facing them as myself, making choices that honored my actual values, rather than accommodating other people's emotional deficits. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to practice this hard-won wisdom. Tonight, I was content to sleep peacefully in the space I'd created, surrounded by the evidence of a life lived deliberately and the promise of more conscious choices ahead.